Hello, my name is Michael Levine. Welcome to another edition of Without Notes, a conversation that has no agenda, no talking points, just two men trying to better understand the complicated and unusual world we're living in. Today, I'm joined by a man that I confess to find a true American hero. If I don't know, metaphoric Mount Rushmore were created for people in the last 40 years of American life, I believe that Secretary Panetta would certainly qualify. He's an outstanding man. He has served in so many roles: Secretary of Defense, Director of CIA, Office of Management and Budget, House Congressman. My goodness. Now, I want to start at the beginning. Mr. Secretary, it's an honor to have you here. Tell us, please, where you were born. How did this all unfold, this most unpredictable life?
Well, Michael, first of all, it's good to be with you, and I enjoy any podcast that doesn't have any notes because I think it gives you a chance to kind of speak from the heart. So I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
there you
Uh,
go.
I'm uh, I'm the son of Italian immigrants, and my parents came to this country like millions of others in the early '30s. My dad was the 13th in his family. And had several brothers come to America ahead of him. And he had one brother, his oldest brother, wound up in Sheridan, Wyoming, working there, and another brother, Tony, wound up in California. So when my parents came, the tradition is you visit your older brother first. And so they did, visited his older brother, Bruno, spent one winter in Sheridan, Wyoming, and my mother suggested that it was time to visit his other brother in California as a result of
Yes, mother will do that to you.
it. so so they made it to California, and he had some friends here in Monterey, thank God, and wound up in Monterey, began a restaurant in downtown Monterey during the war years. Warriors in Monterey were some jumping times. Not only were they catching a lot of sardines and Cannery Row, Steinbeck's Cannery Row developed during that time, but we also had Fort Ord, which was a military reservation that was training the soldiers for World War II, and Monterey was their last stop with civilization. So we had a lot of troops that would come in to the restaurant. And my earliest recollections were standing on a chair in the back of that restaurant washing glasses. My parents believed child labor was a requirement in my family.
But by the way, Mr. Secretary, at what age did you have your first job?
Well, I don't know if you count standing on that chair in the back of the
I
restaurant.
do. I do. Mr. Secretary, I do. Go ahead. What year was
I
that?
had to
How
be
old were
about
you?
I had to be about 6 years old at the time
Okay.
in
So
Monterey.
what I think I want to mention to you is, of course, we're in a very changed world. And learning the habit of hard work, of discipline, of all work having dignity. Mr. Secretary, do you believe in, with the advantage of hindsight, that played a significant role in the unfolding of your story?
Oh, I don't think there's any question. My parents worked very hard. They worked very hard in the restaurant. My mother was there along with my father. She was handling the cash register. And then, you know, my dad sold the restaurant after the war and bought some land in Carmel Valley and planted a walnut orchard. And my brother and I were out there in the orchard moving irrigation pipes and doing all the work you do on a farm. And I tell the story as the trees, my walnut trees grew older. My dad used to go around with a pole and hook and shake each of the branches, and my brother and I used to be underneath collecting the walnuts. So we worked pretty hard. When I got elected to Congress, my father said, "You know, you've been well trained to go to Washington." It was after I got elected to Congress. He said, "You've been well
What year
trained."
was, what year were you first elected to Congress, Mr. Secretary?
1976, 1976.
1976, which
Yep,
was the Jimmy Carter post-Watergate year.
exactly, exactly. And so my dad said to me, he said, "You know, you've been well trained to go to Washington because you've been dodging nuts all your life." So uh,
I like your father. That's good. I like it.
so yeah, no, I think the work ethic was something that was true in the family. You worked hard, and my brother and I were the first in our family to go to college, and both of us wound up going to Santa Clara University, a good Jesuit school. We went both undergrad and law school, and then
Were you a good student, Mr. Secretary?
yeah, I was a pretty good student.
Decent student.
Not
Hard worker?
yeah, again, a lot of hard work and just studying. Uh,
Mhm.
and then in those days, it was the Vietnam War was on, and so Santa Clara required everybody to go through ROTC at the time, even for the first 2 years. And we did that. And then the second 2 years, I decided to continue. And when I graduated, it was like one of those scenes from a Gordon McRae movie, uh, in which I received my degree and then took my gown off, and I had my military uniform underneath and got my commission at that point. And I was able to go through law school, and then after law school, I had to serve 2 years in the army. And when I came back, or I was serving in the army, and I had a I had a chance at that point to either decide whether I go into the practice of law with my brother in Monterey, or whether I wanted to go to Washington. I was really interested in working in Washington, and this is a it's a great story. I didn't have any contacts in Washington. My parents were not involved in politics, so I wrote a guy named Joe Califano, who was an assistant to Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
And I didn't know Joe Califano,
Became
but
an important figure in the administration of the
uh,
Johnson.
and I wrote him out of the blue on because his last name was Califano and my last name was Panetta. And so I wrote him and said, I'm very proud that there's an Italian who's working in the White House. I'd love to be able to get a job back there. And I'll be damned if Joe Califano didn't call me. I was in the intelligence branch here at Fort Ord, and he called me and set up some appointments for me to go back to Washington. And I did. Was interviewed at Justice. I was interviewed at the Pentagon. Interviewed elsewhere in the executive branch. But I decided to go up to Capitol Hill, and I walked around Capitol Hill, and I walked into the office of a senator who I admired, a guy named Tom Kuechel. He was a Republican. And I just walked in the door, and I just said, I like the senator. Be interested in trying to, work for him if I could. And sure enough, they had an opening for a legislative assistant's job. I interviewed with his administrative assistant, a great guy named Hewing Haas, and then interviewed with the senator. And I'll be damned if he didn't hire me. And I went back to Washington with my family, my wife and two kids in diapers, and we went back to Washington. And that's the beginning of the story. Once I got back to
Wow.
Washington, I was gonna,
Wow.
I was just gonna go back for 2 years and then get the hell out and come back and practice law. But 50 years later, I got stuck.
What was your salary at the your first job in Washington?
I remember it perfectly. It was $10,000 a year. I thought I was making a hell of a lot of money.
Happy to get it. Right. All right.
And
So now you stay in Congress how long?
I worked as a legislative assistant for a couple years, and then Kekal got defeated by Max Rafferty.
Yep.
Uh, and and then I went into the administration. Bob Finch became secretary of HEW, the old Department of HEW, and he asked me to come on to work on civil rights because I'd worked on civil rights legislation with Kekal, all of the big bills, which were bipartisan in the Senate. So I was a lawyer, obviously, so I worked on enforcing the civil rights laws, particularly in education. I eventually became director of the Office for Civil Rights. Unfortunately, it was in the Nixon administration, and Nixon had cut a deal with Strom Thurmond that he was going to back off of hard, tough civil rights enforcement. And so, I continued to enforce the law because I believed it was the right thing to do. I swore an oath to enforce the law, and ran into the politics of the Nixon administration, and wound up getting fired from that job. Went to work for John Lindsay in New York City,
Mhm.
moderate Republican.
My
Worked.
mayor at a certain point
Yeah,
when
I'm
I
sure.
was in.
I'm sure he was a very attractive young mayor
Oh
at the
God,
time.
yeah.
New York. And had a chance to work with him and enjoyed that, but then decided it was time to come back to Monterey, practice law with my brother, and then had the chance to run for Congress, and ran for it was 76 that I ran for Congress against a Republican incumbent who'd been around for a long time, and was able to win. It was a tight vote at the time, but I won. And that began 16 years in the Congress, and I
So
enjoyed that.
16 years in the United States Congress. This is a very different Congress than the Congress of today. Bipartisanship was much more prevalent. There wasn't the demonization. So now you spend 16 years in Congress. You leave Congress in what year?
I by the way, along those lines, I often say that in my 50 years, I've seen Washington at its best and Washington at its worst. The
Yes.
good news is I saw Washington work. I mean, the time I was in Washington, both with Kekal and then when I was elected, Democrats and Republicans worked together on
Oh, yeah,
issues.
sure.
When I when I was elected, Tip O'Neill was the Speaker in the House, Democrat from Boston.
Yep.
But he had a great relationship with Bob Michael, who was the minority leader from Illinois. And
Mhm.
did they fight each other in elections? Obviously, they had their differences. But when it came to big issues, they worked together. They felt it was important that both sides worked together on the big issues, and we did. I mean, just in the Reagan
And by the
administration,
way, it was important, and
damn right.
the benefit to the country was significant, and the absence of that is also significant. So
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I often say that during the Reagan administration, we worked together to pass Social Security reform, which is the third rail of politics. We passed
yes,
Social
sir.
Security reform. We passed immigration reform. I worked on that bill when I
Yep.
was back there because I represented an agricultural area.
Yep.
And that was a bipartisan vote. We passed tax reform. That was a bipartisan vote. And
Yep.
as you know, when it came to budgets, we negotiated some tough deficit reduction bills, agreements to reduce the deficit, and those were bipartisan. So it was an important example of how you're supposed to govern in a democracy and be able
Right.
to work together and trust one another and negotiate. So, yeah, I really enjoyed that time. As a matter of fact, people ask me of all the jobs I've held, which one did I like the best? And they're surprised by the answer. I said the one I really enjoyed was being a member of Congress when it worked, because I could do things and I worked with others, and it was a lot of fun to be able to get things done for my constituents, but more importantly, to be able to vote my mind. I could be very independent, and that counted for something when you're in politics. So it was a great time to be there, and obviously my son, who's now in Congress representing my old district, is there at a
That's
very
quite something.
yeah, very different time. And he remembers. I mean, he was back in Washington. He used to come back with me, and he remembered. You know, we used to go out to dinner with Republicans. We used to play basketball. We used to do a lot of things together, and he remembers those times. And he he's a veteran. He doesn't want to go back to Washington just to pound his shoe on the table. So the poor guy is working hard to try to build relationships and try to get some things done. And it's a hell of a lot tougher to do these days than it was in my time, but God bless him
You're
trying.
damn near impossible, right? Now, you leave Congress in what year?
I left Congress after Bill Clinton got elected president of the United States, and
Okay,
I'd been working on the budgets. I was chair of the budget committee. I had some pretty good success, not only passing budgets but working on deficit reduction. So Bill Clinton invited me down to Arkansas. He interviewed me and offered me the job as director of the Office of Management and Budget, and I took
remarkable,
the job. So
remarkable.
that would have been, let's see, I guess 1993 is when I actually,
Yes. And then you became chief of staff of the White House
right,
from 94 to 97.
right.
Now, for those who are not operating in a day-to-day Washington milieu, it is hard to overstate the power and the centrality of the chief of staff. Is that a fair remark, Mr. Secretary?
Yeah, there are obviously different examples of different chiefs of staff.
Oh, yes,
Some are
yes,
able to make that work and some are not.
right.
But I actually, when Clinton asked me to become chief of staff, I really thought that I would model my approach to Jim Baker's approach as chief of staff.
Jim
And really,
Baker is considered one of the deans of the that office.
that's
So
right. That's right. And a very good chief of staff, and somebody who, was very disciplined and had a lot of order in the White House staff. And I believed in that. And Clinton, frankly, needed that,
mm.
have that kind of discipline. And so I basically approached it on that basis. And
Was Jim Baker of any help to you in
yeah, I
working?
called Jim. I'd work with Jim on budget stuff and called him.
Mhm.
And he gave me some pretty damn good advice. His main point was
Like
that,
what? Give me an example of some advice he gave you,
well,
if you're
I mean,
willing.
he said, "Look, you're chief of staff. You're not president of the United States." I'll never forget that quote.
Yeah,
Uh,
there are people who do seem to get that confused at times.
so he said, "Don't forget, you have to deal with the staff. Your job is to run the staff, and obviously you have to be loyal to the president. But you know, uh, always remember uh, that the president of the United States is the one who's elected and the one who has to make the decisions. And what
It's the
you have to do
success.
as chief of staff is to tee up those decisions and make sure that he knows what options are available to him so that he can make the decisions that are important for the country. I never forgot that guidance because I thought it was very important to try to, do everything possible to give. I mean, I look, I was working for a very bright president. Bill Clinton is a very bright guy, has a bright mind, under,
Extremely bright.
understands complicated issues, is a great brief, can understand the most complex issues. And most importantly, he wants that kind of information. He wanted good advice, which was very important. I think most presidents need to have the the willingness to understand they don't know everything about anything. They've got to get advice on some of the very complex issues that they're dealing with and be willing to be willing to listen. And Bill Clinton was willing to do that, and it made it great to be able to put together, a team that could then present to him, particularly on military issues, what are the tough decisions that have to be made?
Well,
What are
what
the
are the policy options and the unforeseen occurrences and the,
Exactly, exactly. So chief of staff, to your point, is a very important position. The most important thing is the relationship between that chief of staff and the president. If it's a good relationship and a relationship of trust, then it can work well. If
would
it
you,
isn't,
when you were chief of staff, would you talk to Bill Clinton regularly, almost daily?
every every day, beginning very early. I mean, I'll never forget. Soon after I got selected for chief of staff, I got a call from Bill Clinton, who sometimes didn't sleep well at night and watched television.
Mhm.
And it was around 2 o'clock in the morning, and he said, Leon, are you watching C-SPAN? Because Fritz Hollings was on. He says Fritz Hollings is being interviewed on C-SPAN, and he's talking about the budget, and I don't agree with some of the things he's saying. And I said, Mr. President, it's 2 o'clock in the
In
morning.
the morning, that's C-SPAN.
Said nobody is watching Fritz Hollings.
Yeah, yeah,
Nobody's watching Fritz Hollings.
right.
And I said that most people are in bed and you should be in bed. That was one of my first experiences.
Well, that shows you have both good judgment and courage, because I'm not sure most people have the capacity to speak like that to the President of the United States. Now, in January 2009, newly elected President Barack Obama nominated you, sir, you, above all other Americans, to be his Director of Central Intelligence Agency. You were confirmed by the Senate. Just no easy task today.
Yep.
And as director of CIA, and this is why I believe you, in part, I believe you belong on a Mount Rushmore of the last 40 years for many reasons, but this is one. And you can tell me I'm wrong. I'd like to hear I'm wrong. As director of CIA, you oversaw the operation that killed Osama bin Laden. Mr. Secretary, I was born in New York City. I was born 2.5 miles north of Ground Zero. You're talking to one of the few Americans alive today, sir, that has had the distinction of watching that World Trade Center be built twice.
Hmm.
I didn't care for the second time nearly as much as I did the first. So I will be forever grateful, endlessly grateful for what you did.
I'm basically briefing them on kind of what's going on. They're also following it, but I was basically relaying what I was hearing from those who were conducting the operation.
What were the exact words that you heard from the SEAL team?
The person who was heading up the operation basically said, I think we have a Geronimo, and I kind of looked around at everybody at Operations Center and said, I think it looks like we may have, bin Laden really was there. And then he said, came back, we think we have Geronimo KIA.
Killed in action.
That's correct.
What was the scene in the operations center of the CIA at that moment?
Well, it wasn't like we were high-fiving. It was more like, frankly, we kind of looked at each other and said all of the work that had been done all of the questions that had been raised, all of the risks that had been talked about, that, you know, that in the end it had all proven right.
I've been told a story, and I want you to tell me if it's a true story or partially true story or just a good punchline at an applause line at a speech. I was told that President Obama made a decision prior to making his final decision on bin Laden to go around a room and talk to about 12 folks that were in a room. You were one of those folks, sir. So was Secretary Clinton. So was Vice President Joe Biden. So was Bob Gates. I am told that only one person of the 12 told the president that he did not think he should go with that operation. That man's name was Joe Biden. There was only one man who said he thought he should go. That man's name was Leon Panetta. The rest of them, including Secretary Clinton, who was Secretary of State, said it's 50-50. It's your call. So, history has a weird way of remembering these things. You got it right. President Biden got it wrong. I don't say that with any sense of arrogance because I might well have gotten it right. I don't know how the hell you got it right. Maybe you're just lucky. I don't know. But thank you on behalf of every decent person in this world and in this country. Thank you for saying what I think many Americans hoped. And did I get that story marginally correct?
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, it began with the president. The president, when he first brought me into his office after I'd been approved as director, made very clear that one of the most important objectives I had was to go after bin Laden. And we did that. You know, went back to CIA and remember asking the staff, well, you know, what's going on with bin Laden? A lot of people raised their hands and gave opinions. And I said, who's in charge? And they all raised their hands and said they were in charge, which told me there was a real
No
problem.
one's in charge. When everybody raises their hand, no one's in charge.
Exactly. So
Right.
I pulled together a task force of appointed people to head up the search that were experienced. And I told them they had to report to me every week as to
God
what was
bless you. God
and so
bless
we
you.
met once a week. And if they came in and said nothing new had happened, I said, you know, that's not acceptable.
It
I
is
said,
not
when
acceptable.
you come in here, if you don't have anything new, you got to tell me at least 5 new ideas you have
That's
for
right.
how you can try to track them down.
God bless you. God
And
bless
so,
you.
so we did that, and to their credit, they worked hard at it, and we got a break getting the names of the couriers for bin
Yep.
Laden,
Yep.
and then put a face to them, and then followed those individuals with a drone, followed them to this compound. And when they got to the compound,
In a bot.
it was in Abbottabad, and the lights went off because this place was about 3 times bigger than other compounds. It had 18-foot walls on one side, 12-foot walls on another side, had a
Didn't
7
accept mail, didn't have any cable TV, didn't have any internet. Now, come on now.
it was you know, we did surveillance and looked at the security there, and obviously there was this strange family living on the 3rd floor that never came out, and so there was a lot of a lot of evidence that, something was going on here. And I remember briefing the president at the time, and he said, you've got to continue to do surveillance on it. And we did 24/7 surveillance using drones, constantly watching and trying to determine whether bin Laden was there. And we never had any direct evidence, but we had a lot of intelligence, that indicated something was going on. One story I'll tell is there was we saw this one person come out of the compound and walk in circles. He was a little older, walk in circles like a prisoner in a prison yard, and then go back inside. And I remember pulling the CIA together, and I said, for God's sakes, that could be bin Laden. Give me a telescope, give me a camera, give me something to get a facial ID on this person, because that could be bin Laden. And they said, it's tough to do. We've got 18-foot walls on one side, we got 12-foot walls on another side. We just can't get a good shot. And I remember saying to them, I said, look, I've seen movies where the CIA can do this, goddammit. So,
Thank you, Hollywood. Thank you.
We laughed about that, but they never really, we were never really able to get 100%. But we built a case on it, and finally the president said he thought we had to do an operation because he was worried that it might leak, and that's when we went to the National Security Council, which is what you described. Right. And the president basically went around that room and said, "What do you think?" Most people raise questions. Look, Bob Gates, who I have tremendous admiration for, Bob Gates had been there when Jimmy Carter's helicopters went down, going after our hostages. So he remembered that and said, that I don't want something bad to happen here. And I respected that. I said,
the question is not whether Secretary Gates remembered it. The question is whether he was traumatized by it. And I think both are fair questions. So I have great respect for Secretary Gates too. And Secretary Gates has a different foreign policy point of view than President Biden, as you know.
I appreciate what you said. But I also believe very strongly that it was an example of intelligence and special forces working together. Their bravery, their dedication, really came together, and they did it. It was a tough mission, but they accomplished it. And I have to tell you that the thing that hit me the most was the fact that I had people like you from New York call me and say thank you for what you did. And I just, that moved me to no end, to understand.
Mr. Secretary, if I could say thank you to you every day of your life from now till the day I die, I would not be saying it too much. And it's hard to describe what it felt like to be in New York City after that incident.
Yeah.
Film footage didn't do it. The smell, the burning smell for weeks on end, the trauma, the assurance that there was going to be another attack.
That's right.
Right. But Mr. Secretary, I want to talk to you about a topic in the news, which is you have passionately endorsed Kamala Harris for president.
I've looked into the eyes of our warriors and deployed them into battle. I gave the order directing our special operations forces to fly 2 helicopters 150 miles into Abbottabad at night. And by the time the sun rose, Osama bin Laden was dead. Because nobody attacks our country and gets away with it. Nobody. That's what our warriors do. That's what our warriors do. Our warriors need a tough, cool-headed commander-in-chief to defend our democracy from tyrants and terrorists. We need Kamala Harris behind the resolute desk. She knows a tyrant when she sees one. And our allies know a leader when they see one.
And one of your logics, now this is baffling to many, to about half the nation, and not baffling to the other half. But to your logic flows, I think, at least it's been reported, from the idea that you believe that she's cool-headed. Now, I don't know, have you met Vice President Harris?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I
So
know her going back a ways, yeah.
You know her going back a ways, you're from California, and you think she's cool-headed.
Yeah. I think she's
And that's
a prosecutor.
okay.
And-
She's
and-
cool-headed.
Yeah.
But, Mr. Secretary, the question is not whether she's cool-headed. The question is whether she's right-headed. Right? You can be cool-headed and wrong, and right-headed and not cool-headed. So I appreciate your comment that she's cool-headed. But is she right? Has she behaved in a way that you're comfortable with, Mr. Secretary, on the United States southern border? Has she behaved in a way that you were proud of in the Afghanistan retreat? You were the Secretary of Defense. Are you proud of that, sir?
No, I think mistakes were made in that whole endeavor, and but frankly, I put that responsibility on the back of Joe Biden and the decision he made.
But isn't it fair, Mr. Secretary, isn't it fair to say while the principal responsibility for that fiasco, when there's nothing, fiasco is moderate in describing what happened. And there's no question that the president has to bear the responsibility of that. But isn't it also fair, given your extensive knowledge of intimate government, that the vice president bears some responsibility since she is now the candidate of that national party? Is that not a fair statement, sir?
Well, Michael, I've been in the Oval Office and I've been in the National Security Council meetings, and I've seen the President of the United States having to make decisions.
Many presidents.
Absolutely, and I've seen that happen. And look, in the end, I have to tell you, the President of the United States makes the decision. I mean,
Right.
vice presidents can talk, secretaries of state can talk, secretaries of defense can talk, but in the end, who makes the decision? It's the President of the United States. And people
Well-
have to say, okay, Mr. President, you're the president. And I've seen vice presidents, who might raise concerns, but when the president makes a decision, you salute, and the President of the United States is supported in whatever decision that president makes. That's the bottom line. And
Okay, fair
yeah,
enough.
does
Fair enough.
everybody in the room bear some responsibility? Sure.
Of
But
course,
in
yes.
the end, who makes the decision? It's the President of the United States.
Okay, so Mr. Secretary, now to the topic of the election. Kamala Harris has made a decision, some feel deeply premeditated, to avoid interviews. This is inconsistent with our history as a democracy. if you were advising her, which you're not, are you troubled by the idea that Americans have but 80 days left and she is intentionally avoiding any interviews to know where she stands and where she differs from this president? Is that concerning to you, sir?
Yeah, look, I'm a believer that the president has to be transparent with the American people
Right,
about what they believe and what they want for the country.
right.
And I think too often in recent years, presidents have kind of tried to hide from that, and I think they pay a price when they do that. So
Yeah.
I think it's very important to be open. I think it's very important to be transparent. I think it's very important to be honest with the American people about the
And
challenge.
real and authentic.
Yeah, and I look, that's how we can try to come together as a country. I mean, the biggest responsibility for a president is to be able to reach the average American and convince them that what that president is trying to do is the right thing for the country. You got to take the time to do that. You can't just rely on on people around you to try to get the point across. It is the president of the United States that has to do that. So uh, I I think in the end she knows that. She knows she's going to have to do that. She's going to have to do interviews. She's going to have to speak out and she'll do that certainly during a debate. She'll be tested as to what she believes and how she handles herself. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities here, and
Okay.
I think she'll do it, and mainly because, my impression is when you've been a prosecutor, the most important thing you have to do is you got to make the case. You got to make the case. You can't walk into the courtroom and not have your evidence put together and not make the arguments to the jury that you have to make.
Finally, before we say goodbye, and thank you for your generosity, Mr. Secretary. As you sit at the dinner table on any given evening and you think about the country, it's almost unrecognizable in certain ways.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about when you took office in the 70s or 80s, even the 90s, to compare the America of Bill Clinton or Barack Obama to the America of today is just hard to do. It's hard to envision. Now, my question is this. We have a myriad of problems, Mr. Secretary, a myriad. Is there one or two that more concern you than others? If Kamala Harris or Donald Trump said, what are the one or two things that I need to best focus on, that the president needs to better focus on? Is it debt reduction? Are you concerned about a growing $35 trillion debt? I read a statistic recently, Mr. Secretary, where we've spent $118 billion in the Ukraine, and we spent $4 billion rebuilding Maui, Hawaii. Now, I don't know that that's true, but even if it's partially true, it's concerning. Somebody's got some splaining to do. So what are the topics that really are at the center of your mind today?
Look, Michael, look, you've asked a very important question, and the best way I can approach it is to say this. I tell the students here at the Panetta Institute that in a democracy, we govern either by leadership or by crisis. If leadership is there and willing to make the tough decisions involved in leadership, and they have to be tough decisions,
Right.
they have to be risky decisions because that's the
Risky, tough,
nature of the
and
job.
risky.
And if you make those kinds of decisions, then you can avoid crisis. certainly contain crisis. But if you're not willing to make those kinds of tough decisions, then we'll govern by crisis. And very frankly, in the last 15, 20 years, we've largely
That's what
been
we've been
governing
doing.
by crisis.
And is it because leaders have been more interested in pandering than doing the right thing? They're more interested in what can I get, and that's pandering,
Well,
versus
yeah, look, they're interested in survival. They don't want to piss off their own party, and so they tend to be, uh, relying
risk
on
adverse.
the
Risk
base
adverse.
the base of the party, and so the result is that both parties have moved to the extremes rather than the center. So we've lost that ability to govern. We've lost the leadership critical to governing in our democracy. So,
Right.
you talk about the budget, you can talk about world leadership, you can talk about the problems we're facing in a dangerous world, you can talk about immigration and the other issues we're confronting. But the heart of this is leadership, the
Right.
willingness to be able to step up and make tough decisions that have to be made. And yes, you're going to piss off people. And yes, you may offend your own party. But your responsibility as president of the United States, first and foremost, is to govern our democracy.
And to
That
do the right thing, independent of whether it's popular or not.
you're damn right. You're damn right.
We need more Winston Churchill and less Neville Chamberlain.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly. You
Fair
gotta have
enough.
to do it.
Mr. Secretary, what a pleasure. What an honor. You're an extraordinary man. And I see from your smile, I see why you might well have been so successful. Give your son our best.
I
How
will.
he's chosen to be in such a masochistic endeavor is beyond us. But we wish him well and we thank him for his service. And thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it very much. I don't know if an Italian will ever make it to to the monument in South Dakota, but
Yeah, I don't know. But we
but
can dream.
but you know what? I'll tell you, I've always been proud of the fact that I'm the son of immigrants, and I've had a chance to live the American dream. Thank you.
Well, you really have. Okay. Thank you again. Bye, Mr. Secretary. My friends, what an extraordinary conversation that was. That man is 86 years old. What an extraordinary conversation about an extraordinary life. And you know what? I was appreciative of the fact that he talked straight. Now, did he withhold some things? I'm sure he did. Does he have greater concerns than maybe he expressed? I'm sure he does. But he was honest, transparent, authentic. Maybe that's because he's not running for political office. He's a man that made me think, and I ask that you take this conversation, whether you agreed with him or not, and think about it more. It was an important, meaningful conversation, and I'm very grateful to Secretary Panetta. My name is Michael Levine, and this is Without Notes.